I think it's now a good time to swing into the presentation part. And Jennifer's here. Jennifer Stoever is a Southern California girl who's been in Binghamton for about 15 years, teaches at the English department, creative African American literature, as well as composition and creative writing. And we met her about 5 years ago for her class called How We Listen, and we worked on oral histories for Water Street, and it evolved into something called the Binghamton Soundwalk Project, which was presented at First Friday in May of 2018. And who knows what the next version will be as we all evolve here. But she also wrote a book, and I'm gonna have to read this because I'm not good at this. Her book is on the sonic color line, race and cultural politics of listening. And the goal is to help readers understand how they experience and enact race and racism through how we listen to others' voices, musics, and environments. And this is here you go. Today, she's going to share with us her current work, or what she's doing now. She's looking at the Bronx in the 1960s and 70s and the music there. So without further ado, Jennifer, take it away.
Hey, before we start, I'm going to mute everybody. And Jennifer, if you would please unmute yourself.
Right. And then let me know about questions, and about 12:15 or so, we'll start being able to ask questions and share your thoughts, okay? So just let me know, and I'll try to choreograph that, maybe. Okay, bye. Go for it, Jennifer.
Okay, hello, everybody. All right, I just put the University Press link to my book in the chat because you can download the introduction for free there. And if you want to check it out, or the introduction, I think, has a lot of the argument and is really, really useful. So that's in the chat. Okay, so I am going to get started. Let me share my screen. I'll be playing some music today. I'll be playing some pieces from some of the new oral histories I've done. And let's see, here we go. I haven't been Zooming professionally for a winter break yet. So this will be a good warm up. So excuse me if I'm a little rusty on the Zoom here. Okay, let me share my screen.
And Jennifer has had a couple of snow days, which as a single mom, it definitely impacts her ability to get stuff done.
Lord, 3 days last week.
For us, so no more snow days.
I'm hoping it doesn't snow too hard this week. I'm crossing the fingers. All right, let me play this. Okay, and share. I'm able to share my screen. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, can everybody, what are we looking at? Hang on. Sorry. Let me full screen this. Sorry, I'm trying to get the full screen and I think I closed out of it. I swear I do this for a living. Hang on. There we go. Slideshow. Play from current slide.
We're not seeing your screen.
Not seeing it yet? All right, one more time. How's that? Did I do it? All right. Okay, so this opening slide here is an image of the living room of one of my oral history interviewees from the 1960s. And you'll learn a lot more about Lorraine Montenegro today. I have this picture here, as you can see, where she kept her stereo. And if you look real close, might be kind of hard because you might have the Zoom screen open. You can see a stack of her records there in her room. I'm going to start off with playing a little bit of Aretha Franklin for everybody today. If you can't hear it, let me know in the chat.
It's Aretha Franklin.
Don't moan. Listen, baby. Tell your sister to don't moan. Pharaoh's army. All the men got drowned in the sea one day. Yes, they did. Mary, don't weep. Tell Martha not to moan. Don't moan. Don't moan.
The challenge today is going to be not wanting to just play all of the songs in their entirety. I really recommend, if you haven't got a chance to see Aretha Franklin's concert film that came out a few years ago called Amazing Grace. It's available for free on Hulu. You can see her perform this album live when she recorded it in Los Angeles in the mid 70s. It's amazing. I want to dedicate this presentation today to the lives and memory of Aretha Franklin, Rashad Ollison, and Lorraine Montenegro. Lorraine, whom I had the pleasure of interviewing for this piece, and you'll hear some quotes from her today, died in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico from dehydration, a death that was preventable, but for the lack of response by the US federal government. She had been visiting the home where she was planning to retire. I hope this piece and its future iterations provides comfort to her family and does her legacy justice. And may all of them rest in peace and in power. So I played you a little song from Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace, which is one of the albums I'm going to center on today. It's a live gospel record. The cover featured the artist resplendent in shoulder grazing earrings, an African-inspired dress and head wrap. This is her top-selling release of all time. It was recorded in Los Angeles at the New Temple Missionary Baptist Church in July 1972 and released by Atlantic later that year. In addition to Franklin's powerful reinterpretation of the title song, you heard her version of the spiritual Mary, Don't You Weep, first recorded by, it's a song that goes way, way back into the 19th century. It was a song that was composed and sung by enslaved peoples. It was first recorded by the Fisk Jubilee Singers in 1915 and later reworked into the civil rights anthem, If You Miss Me from the Back of the Bus, by the Freedom Singers. On this record also is her version of How I Got Over, composed by gospel singer Clara Ward in 1951, and very famously sung by Mahalia Jackson at the 1963 March on Washington. All three of these songs bear traces of Black freedom struggles in the 19th century, as well as the 20th. And Aretha's early 1970s release pulls through extended vibrational resonance of the emergent politics, activism, and sonic practice of the long 1960s. And while I was doing some research for this project, a really cool local connection, I heard the photographer Carrie Mae Weems speak a couple years ago, 2018, in the last Cornell biennial. They didn't have one in 2020, so it was the very last one. She's an amazing photographer. She's also a professor at Syracuse. And as she was talking, she was, opening up her talk by sharing her lifelong love for Aretha Franklin and mourning her passing earlier that year. And she told stories about how her mother first introduced her to Aretha's music when she said her mom sat with her friends in the kitchen, drinking Pepsi and listening. Weems was born in 1953. Her recollections of intergenerational intimacy, care, and musical sharing offers insight into the appearance of Amazing Grace. It's hard to see. This was the art piece that installation that Carrie Weems had in Ithaca that year. And where that arrow is pointing at, that's Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace album. And right next to it, it's a little harder to see, it's green. That's actually the cover of one of Run DMC's records. And that was one of the things, in addition to already kind of being in thinking about this project and doing research at the Cornell Hip Hop Collection, seeing Carrie Mae Weems put those two records together in this art exhibit was really important for me. Thinking about Aretha Franklin, thinking about her mom and her friends in the kitchen, drinking Pepsi, bonding, sharing knowledge, got me to think about Carrie Mae Weems's kitchen table series from 1990, one of her most famous series of photographs. It's 20 photographs, it's 14 panels of writing. She shows a really different kind of domestic space than you saw in the other art exhibit that she did. Black women's kitchens. She deliberately created a sense of almost like time dilation. Those photographs could be the 90s, they could be the 60s, they could be the 70s. She kind of creates a sense of a blurring of time. That's her in the photographs there. She often photographed herself. Those could be her mom and her friends in the 60s listening to Aretha Franklin. She told W Magazine in 2016 that the images of the kitchen table series are more current now than ever before. And she's still very much aware of the ways in which women are discounted. This is her speaking. They're undervalued within the world generally and within the art world in particular. There's still a sort of dearth, a lack of representational images of women. And not, like strong, powerful, and capable, that kind of stuff, but rather just images of Black women in the world. So her series not only represents Black women in the world, but how they construct spaces enabling them to create themselves, where they braid hair, study for school, cook food, chop it up with friends, play cards, love women and men, raise children, and play and listen to music. And one of the text panels, there's a lot of musical quotes throughout the text panel, but I noticed that she's got the line there that I have highlighted about reaching out and touching somebody's hands, which, this panel describes her thinking with Aretha Franklin, describing the character's loneliness within a relationship and feeling like she needed to reach out and touch somebody's hand. This song was written by Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson, actually for Diana Ross for her solo debut for Motown in 1972. And we know it became a standard of Ross's, but Franklin memorably closes out her album in 1971, Live at the Fillmore West, which it's arguably a definitive version, and I'm pretty sure that Aretha herself would consider it so. Let me start off with
I would like to say before we leave that you have been much more than I could have ever expected. I'd like to leave you saying, reach out and touch somebody's hand. Make this a better world if you can. We love you. Reach out and touch somebody's hand. Why don't you make it a better world if you can? Turn around and touch your brother, touch your sister. Reach out and touch, extend your hand. Somebody's hand. Make this a better world if you can. Reach out and touch somebody's hand. Need I say more than that? Need I say more? No. Reach out and touch. Reach out and touch. Whatever your brother's had. Go on and make it a better world. I tell you, if you can. I love you. I love you. And I love you. Love me. The moment you get back, I love you. Reach out.
Whew. It's hard to listen to right now because we haven't been able to reach out and touch people like that for a while. My goodness. As Weems's words and the lives of and creative work produced by and about Black and Puerto Rican women in the 60s reminds us that when their kitchen and living room revolutions were plotted at 33 and a third RPM, they were often voiced by, through, and with Aretha Franklin, a call heard and deeply registered by their children. As the shattered pieces of the marriage settled around her, Rashad Ollison wrote of his own mother in an obituary for Aretha Franklin in the Baltimore Sun in August 2018, Mama knelt at the altar of Aretha. She played Amazing Grace, seemingly every waking hour during the turbulent years of her marriage, the only years I remember. The album often played on Sunday mornings as we got ready for church, and the fiery, holy sounds sometimes filled the house well into the night. For Ollison's mother, Diane, born in 1950, just a little older than Carrie Mae Weems, repeatedly playing Aretha steadied, inspired, comforted, and armored her in an untenable living situation, dealing with a cheating, abusive, and often absent husband while working overtime, raising 3 children. Ollison delves more deeply into his mom's listening habits in his 2016 memoir, Soul Serenade, Rhythm Blues and Coming of Age Through Vinyl. I really recommend it. He is a gorgeous writer, revealing how his mom's musical selecting in the home aired an unspoken connection that he learned to read carefully as a child. And this is Rashad talking. The song she played indicated her mood. If Respect or Sweet Baby Since You've Been Gone rocked the house, her spirits were up. Soaring ballads such as Angel and You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman meant she was reflective. Moody cuts like Ain't No Way and Do Right Woman, Do Right Man meant she didn't want to be bothered, so we tiptoed around her. So much of Mama's life was reflected and refracted in Aretha's lyrics. Young Ollison's experience of listening to his mother listen to Aretha allowed her a vulnerability that she was rarely able to express to him otherwise. Her own family history, combined with working 2 jobs, the stresses of single motherhood and financial precarity, left her physically drained, emotionally distant, and all too often short-tempered. But vibrationally, Diane's music touched her children in ways that she couldn't or wouldn't. It offered an alternative when her touch seared rather than soothed. She had no sugar-coated words of encouragement, no open arms to enfold you, Ollison recalled. Any abrasions on the heart, you would better pray away or seek an outlet that wouldn't get you killed. For Diane, this outlet was collecting and selecting records and listening to them. Her collection offered her an archive of her experience, the expression of a fine-grained palette of deep emotion when words were both not enough and too much. Children are always listening, and it can get very lonely with only them around. The companion of, he called Aretha a cultural guidepost in the form of grown women who have been there and back again. Uplift for your bad days. Ollison also calls Aretha an aural sunbeam. I really like that. And a method of comforting and safeguarding her children, even sometimes from herself. The grooves of Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace, let me go back. There we go. In particular, possess such power. Coupling the sky-ripping strength of Aretha's voice with Mama's warrior woman presence, Ollison writes, I felt protected in Daddy's absence. He eventually began to trace this absence through his own record collection, built from the records his father left behind and the examples of his mother's Black feminist listening habits. Perhaps Amazing Grace also reminded Diane Ollison what Black feminist activist Judy Juanita wrote about Aretha in her 2016 novel, Virgin Soul. She's also the author of that book of essays there, De Facto Feminism, that came out a few years back, which I really recommend. In this novel, it's a coming of age story. It's based on her own upbringing and childhood in East Bay in California and Oakland. It's about a young woman who becomes a Black Panther in 1960s Oakland and proclaims to a crowded cafeteria when she's like coming to consciousness, You know, don't you, that the entire state of the Black male-female relationship changed when Aretha Franklin took on Otis Redding's respect. Genevieve, the protagonist of the novel, witnesses these words and soon becomes so into music that she begins to lift some records from the campus bookstore to add to her own collection, putting her initials on each album, even though her roommate said that they were the property of the whole house. Rashad Allison, too, became a record collector, as he wrote in his own memoir. Lifelong Bronx resident and community activist Lorraine Montenegro is one such mother whose record collecting and selecting practices shaped early hip hop, in particular, the perspective of her son, the photographer Joe Conzo. I interviewed Montenegro in October 2015 alongside her son, one of 5 children she raised as a single mother. Montenegro describes music as a lifelong interest, along with social justice, both instilled by her parents. Her father avidly collected classical 78s, while her mother, Evelina Antonetti, founded United Bronx Parents in 1966. Her mom, Antonetti's tireless and fearless advocacy earned her the titles of Titi within the community, and can I say that? The H word, Lady of the Bronx, outside it. She was a fierce activist. UPB was founded as a nonprofit coalition advocating for bilingual education, better schools and housing, daycare services, and emergency food programs for Bronx residents in the 70s and 80s. Following Antonetti's death in 1984, Montenegro expanded UPB's focus to include transitional housing and AIDS and addiction-related services, unfortunately in high demand during New York's dramatic disinvestment in the Bronx and its residents. Music, Montenegro repeats several times during our interview, has always been a part of my life, from childhood memories of her grandmother's piano to her teenage years at the High School of the Performing Arts. She told me a story about how her principal caught her for truancy when she was in the middle of a Broadway audition for West Side Story. To her years as a single mother, where she said music functioned as, quote, a medicine or a remedy for her struggles. Music has always been a crutch in my life, Montenegro says, referring to the term's best sense, a support, something to lean on emotionally when her marriages broke apart, to give her energy when the stress of raising 5 children alone overwhelmed, and to inspire when the Bronx's community needs grew exponentially in the 70s and early 80s. I knew my mom was getting ready to go out to the Apollo, Conzo remembered. This is her son, Joe, because she would get out her Aretha records and get ready. Montenegro used Aretha Franklin records to surround herself in a transformational zone of pleasure, imagination, and female power, selecting Franklin not just as a voice to listen to, but spending time with a voice that listened to her back. And if you look here again, I have the arrow, you can see where she kept her stereo and how important it was to her in her bedroom with her, surrounded by her religious iconography. And this is a picture that her son took. And I'll put the link in the chat during our conversation. You can actually go online. The Cornell Hip Hop Collection has all of Joe Conzo's photographs from their collection digitized. So you can go in and see a lot of these in there. Her collection, she said, was mainly classical, Motown, and a lot of Latino records, especially salsa and boogaloo. And many of Conzo's photographs from their apartment during this period, you can see her record collection. That's Joe Conzo there when he was in his teenage years. He served as the Cold Crush Brothers official photographer. The Cold Crush Brothers, I'll show you some photographs of them in a second, were one of the first hip hop groups. And he went to high school with them. And so he loved to take pictures and was experimenting with it. So he became their official photographer. And Conzo and his friends would congregate at Lorraine's house, hanging out, listening to music, talking about parties at places like the T Connection and Disco Fever. And, it's important that we don't think about places like Lorraine Montenegro's apartment and her kitchen as being really important to the birth of this art form. She enabled hip hop and its community to come into being through the fellowship of music and food. hip hop used to come over to my house every Tuesday and have pork chops, she told me. She said she fed many hungry young people during some of the Bronx's hardest economic times, which was no small feat. Her record collecting and her selecting practices, her home DJing, if you will, very materially show us that music worked as a form of agency and survival for Bronx mothers and a way of caretaking of their children and the community's children, and that it grew from their political activism and a lot of times bolstered it and carried it. Around that same time, I want to show you some of these. These are some of Konzo's photographs where you can see, this is Tony Tone and his mother, Mrs. King, at his birthday party. And so many, and looking through these photographs, I think because our culture often only focuses on the artist, we don't look at who else is there and see how many women were part of the birth of this art form. And so the mothers are in so many pictures. A lot of times it was them that would help rent the halls, would sell food and work the door, and that they were a fundamental part of this whole experience. It wasn't just a masculine culture. And this is the Cold Crush Brothers performing at the Hope Avenue Boys Club. You can see Easy AD there, Almighty KG and JDL. If you look real, Kumo D is right there for those of you that know him as an MC. Tony Tone's mom is back here in the background. And if you look and see, the front 3 rows are exclusively women. None of them are identified in the archive. Only the artists on stage are. And it's kind of one of my missions with this project is to find those early hip hop fans and try to identify them and talk with them and make sure that they're identified in the archive as well. Around that same time, Brooklyn-born Larry Levan, he's a DJ, legendary resident of New York City's Paradise Garage from 1980 to 1987. He helped break hip hop beyond the Bronx by playing it in the clubs. He too credits his single mom, Minnie's, musical influence for his emotive and innovative DJ aesthetic. She regularly played in blues, jazz, and gospel, and taught him to use her turntable when he was 3, so she could make him put on records so we could dance together. This is at the top, it's from a zine that I found that someone had made about Larry Levin, and that's a panel of him and his mom dancing together. And he actually took her last name because they were so close. When Minnie would drop by the garage, Levin would, it doesn't matter what time she came through, he would start playing gospel songs. Mary Don't You Weep that I played at the beginning was a favorite of hers. And no matter what, no matter who was on the dance floor, he would stop and he would put on Aretha for her. Early hip hop DJ Africa Bambaata's mother too loved music, collected records. His first 200 records. This is the knowledge that started this whole project. I was looking through his record collection at Cornell. They purchased it from him a few years back, and there's 42,000 records there. But what I was interested in was the first couple thousand, the ones that he really used in those early days to put different kinds of genres of music together and DJ, for hip hop. And the archivist there told me, just as an aside, that the first 200 records belonged to his mom, and they were labeled and numbered, so I could actually look through them. And I was so shocked that I had not known that, and that the archive didn't have it marked, didn't have his mom's name on the archive to let us know that. And the way that story is submerged was really important to me to begin to document this. And as I started looking, all the early DJs got either their records, technological know-how, or just support from their moms in ways that have been forgotten by the kind of general stories the way we tell history about music. So she would play records. She played live at the Fillmore West for him in particular. And he would go on to his collection and add 1975's You, 1974's With Everything I Feel in Me, 1977 Sweet Passion, and Aretha's greatest hits to his own record collection. And, you know, his record collection is called The Building Blocks of Hip Hop by you know, most DJs now. And it seems shocking. A lot of people don't think about Aretha as connected to hip hop. And DJ Grandmaster Flash, who was also one of the first DJs, reminded the world of this connection after Aretha died from cancer. So she's known as the Queen of Soul the world over, but she's also the Queen Mother of hip hop. And she has inspired many, many hip hop tracks. 362 songs have sampled pieces from Aretha Franklin, sometimes her voice, sometimes her piano, sometimes just, you know, background parts from the song. New York-based groups from the 80s, Roxanne Shante, Kool Moe Dee, Houdini, slightly later, EPMD and Public Enemy played, you know, also have sampled some of her songs. And I'm gonna play a little bit, almost done, but I wanna play a little bit so you could hear like what it sounds like to hear Aretha Franklin sampled. So I'm gonna play a little bit from To Be Young, Gifted and Black, and then I'll play a little bit from some songs from different eras that have sampled her music. Okay, hang on. So this is a little bit of Young, Gifted and Black. And this was Anita Simone's song. So she was covered, but you know, when Aretha covers a song, it's very difficult for anyone else to take it back or claim it. I'm going to fast forward a little bit so you can hear the piano in the middle. There we go.
In this whole world, you know, there are millions of boys and girls who are...
Okay, I'm going to play you a little bit from MC Lyte in the 80s. You hear the piano right there.
Yeah. This is Lyte coming at you, shouting out to everybody in the hood, up to no good.
This is Gangstar, a group from the Bay Area in the 90s. Heavy D from kind of like late 80s, early 90s.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Do it like this, though. 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 Do it like this. Fat like Hey yo, rough, rugged.
Play you, and most recently, this is from Rhapsody, amazing female rapper from 2018.
Believe me, I done seen it all. You young talking to old you. When haters come around, look them down, tell them we don't owe you. You gonna lose some friends, but those circles are better.
So you see in each era, each generation, they take Aretha's sound and put their own spin on it. And it's like this, the experience of their moms listening to Aretha and then listening to other artists listening to Aretha, she gets worked and reworked into hip hop. And this is really key because, again, this is a forgotten history. We all learned that hip hop pretty much, make sure I'm on the right slide here. Here we go. Hip hop pretty much sprang from the, hang on, let me close the chat out too. Sorry, there we go. Fully formed from the heads of the big three, the hip hop DJs, Grandmaster Flash, Kool Herc, and Africa Bambaataa. And this story of women's listening has been really forgotten. And it's also important because just for them, their own selves, like I'm not just interested in this because of hip hop, but I'm interested in it because of their own lives and the importance of music. We also don't ever hardly talk about women as record collectors and the big influences that women have on music in general. And Africa Bambaataa talks about it a lot, to his credit. You know, he would say, I've got to give credit to my mom. She played a lot of different music in the house. One minute you'd hear soul like James Brown and Motown and the Stax Volt sound. Next minute it would be sounds like Mama Africa by Miriam Makeba and Calypso or Soul Soul. The more pop sounds like Edith Piaf and Barbra Streisand, to like Three Dog Night and Creedence Clearwater Revival. So most of their moms had a way more adventurous and interesting musical taste than any women are given credit for, especially moms. Kool Herc in the center, who is all but universally acknowledged as hip hop's first DJ, he described how when he was a child in Jamaica, his mom, Nettie Campbell, was studying for nursing in New York. And she used to bring records back to the family in Jamaica from Motown and Smokey Robinson that influenced his taste and his aesthetic. Grandmaster Flash, all the way to the left, his autobiography actually describes how his mom would listen and talk with him while she would listen to Ella Fitzgerald in the kitchen. And he experienced his mom's relationship to music as something that brought them closer. He would describe it as magic medicine. And here's him talking. As she's cooking, Flash recalls, she'd throw on an Ella Fitzgerald LP. The strings rise and I watch the muscles in her face ease up. Mom smiles all the way up to her eyes. Mom still loves Ella. Mom still loves me too. When she squeezes my hand, I can feel a little magic medicine of my own. And that's how he would speak of his own DJing, as a way that would bring people together and create energy between them that he would give to them and they would give back to him. He described it as the beat being love. And a lot of that comes from him and his mom's experience together. I don't have too much time to show you, but there's a famous scene in a film, very good, interesting Binghamton connection, because Charlie Ahern, who wrote and shot this movie, is from Binghamton. Him and his twin brother left here, I think, age of 21. This is one of the most important movies of hip hop, and Grandmaster Flash is called Wild Style, and he's in the kitchen when he's DJing. And I think that him talking about his mom and where she listened to records had a lot to do with this scene. There we go. The importance of Black and Latinx women's record collection goes beyond the 60s. It goes beyond the Bronx. Elaine Brown, former Black Panther Party chairwoman, grew up in Philadelphia with her Aunt Mary's record collection. Her aunt worked as a wire clipper for RCA Victor in Camden, New Jersey, and she would bring home discounted stereo equipment. She'd play Marian Anderson, Harry Belafonte, and Eartha Kitt. Assata Shakur there was also a Black Panther Party member and feminist. She could not afford records growing up, but she would save up money for the jukebox growing up in North Carolina. And she would listen to Fats Domino, Nat King Cole, James Brown, and Big Maybelle. And she said, next to food, music was my love. So for this project, for me, like, rather than treating conversations about women's record collecting as like footnotes or interesting details, or frivolously as women, particularly Black women and Latinx women are treated, that this is actually central to the story, that collecting and playing records was a political act. it shaped and passed on a Black feminist listening practice. And so I'm looking through the archives, as you saw, looking for mentions of records, looking through Joe Conzo's photographs of homes and his, what those living spaces were like, those kitchen table photographs from this era. And I'm also doing interviews and oral histories with women about their record collecting. And I wanted to kind of close with a piece from that for you so you can hear some of my current conversations. This is an interview from a woman named Gail McLean. Gail McLean also has a Binghamton connection. Her son, Rob Ford, used to call games for the B-Mets. That's actually how I met him. He called, and he also went to Syracuse and would call games for Syracuse. He now calls games he's the voice of the Houston Astros. And Gail McLean was involved in hip hop through Rob's dad, who was a producer for Curtis Blow, the song The Breaks. Rob Ford produced that. So this is an interview I did with Gail when we could still talk with people in person. This is from fall of 2019, and it's a clip of her talking about her and her mom and their connection through Aretha.
This is one of my favorite Aretha albums. Aretha, right?
What do you like about it?
What I like about Aretha, period, is that she's been in love, and she's been heartbroken, because nobody can sing a love song the way she can. You know that when she loves, through her music, through her songs, she loves hard, and she's been let down. You can tell that through her music. She has let's see, the way she sings, Never Let Me Go, she is just phenomenal. A phenomenal singer. And when she sang a love song, I believe her. I believe she's in pain. She was just phenomenal at the way she would just deliver a song, and her piano playing. That just set it on over the top. She was Aretha. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I have some more here. So basically, because of my mom influenced my taste in music, because I basically like what she likes, which is so unusual. There's nothing else in our lives. We used to disagreed on everything else. If she said up, I went down. She say green, I say blue. But in music, we were always on the same page. I don't know anything that my mother loved in music that I didn't like. Now, when B.B. King came out with The Thrill Is Gone, my mother played it so often. I would say, Mother, the thrill is gone. Come on. We have to keep hearing this over and over again. But that's one thing we connected with. Dancing, because she liked to dance and keep up with the latest dances, and music. That's one thing that we had in common, and that was our way of connecting.
And that was a story for so many people. For many DJs, MCs, dancers, artists, crate digging began at home in the working musical archives, leaning up against a stereo, sounds carrying their mother's histories, emotions, memories, and hopes. And it's more than time to acknowledge and deeply meditate on this important relationship, these important practices, and the way that Gail, Lorraine Montenegro, Regina Sadler, and many other women in the Bronx collected, selected, listened in their living rooms, shifted their children's worlds and the musical ground beneath all of our feet. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to answer any of your questions and hear stories. I'm ready.
Go for it. Does anyone got a question? Go for it. We should probably defer to Beverly, Dr. Dorsey first, but maybe not.
I could get my notebook too, because I'm sure I'm learning some things. I'm always here to learn.
Well, Jennifer, I'll go first. My name is Janine. I'm Beverly's daughter. I live in Baltimore, and I'm a music teacher in Baltimore City.
Oh, yes.
And I'm just thoroughly blessed by what you shared, because it's a concept I've never considered before, and I've never heard expressed in the teaching of music history. Of any music history, looking at the past influences of the musicians, pointing towards their mother, their fathers. So I think it's just invaluable to realize that, yeah, there is history that led these musicians to how they created and expressed themselves. And thank you so much for presenting this, for doing this research and wanting to give the mothers the credit that's so greatly due. So thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this and look forward to reading more of what you're putting together. So thank you
so much. And one of the things I'm doing is every interview I'm doing, they're going to house it at the Cornell Hip Hop collection with all of their hip hop stuff. So these interviews will be there. There'll be transcripts. They'll be there for people to research and to use for Cornell has a 500-year plan for their archive. So they're going to be there for a really long time.
Wow. Beautiful.
All right. I just wanted to speak as a person of an older generation before the hip hop. I do thoroughly enjoy your presentation, Ms. Stoever, is it?
Yes.
Of course, I grew up as I said, in a different era. I grew up not in the Bronx, but in Brooklyn, not too far from the Bronx. And we went to places like the Apollo, and there's another place, the Audubon, and so on, for dancing and music, which we had thoroughly enjoyed, Nat King Cole, and those musicians in that era. So this is quite illuminating to me, because it's beyond or after my generation. And so I'm thinking, gee, this is an epoch in music history, particularly music history in the 20th and 21st century. And so I do very much appreciate what you have presented. I won't contra anything that you said, because I look at that music and the music that I grew up with, involved in, as almost totally different. But I know that a musicologist, a historian, would be able to, shall I say, bring these two together and say, no, they're not totally separate. They have many, many links. But to me, as I've expressed, I grew up in a totally different era, a totally different musical influence. And I wish I had the time to investigate what you have presented to us. So thank you. And if I have the time in 24 hours, with all the things that come up we come up against and have to do in the way of taking care of ourselves, influencing young people, I shall try. But thank you again, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey. It's nice to meet you. And your daughter.
Nice to meet you.
My question for you, Jennifer, is, so I've written a dissertation myself, and I'm just wondering, what is the hurdle that people have to get over in order to go from being a listener to being a DJ or an artist? Whether it's the same kind of hurdle that you have to get over from being a prolific reader like myself to being a writer, because it is a big anyway, it's just
yeah, it is. Because you know what? I have a lot of records and I get asked a lot of times to play them and DJ myself, but I haven't gotten over the idea of like playing in public. But I think that's what like my research is thinking about, is that I do play at home for my kid, and I play like I DJ at home, and that's important too. That just like when you write poetry for yourself or when you write things to share, like it has its own circle of influence. And I think sometimes it's important. Like I started to do this by studying Africa Bambaataa, because I've done so much research on how sound can be used as a racist practice, and the way that, we have lines up set around how you're supposed to talk where and what, all those things. But Africa Bambaataa as a DJ would just, play all sorts of things together. And I loved his DJing. And I was like, wait a minute, like what he's actually doing is he's telling us how to listen. And so I actually think of DJs as like super listeners, that they're not just playing music, but they're telling us how they hear music and how they hear the connections, and they're teaching us how to listen differently. And when I made that kind of move, I was like, oh, that's what his mom passed on, right? It was that listening differently. And he's sharing that with us. And a lot of the hurdles that women had to pass then was just being able to DJ. Like a lot of the research I've read, and a lot of women I talked to in the 70s in the Bronx were like, we didn't have cars. We couldn't carry all that equipment. We didn't want to, who's going to take your records on the subway if you don't have a bunch of people around that are going to be like, don't mess with my records on the subway. And so a lot of women were really barred from participation in that way because of like those kind of physical limitations, but also their parents keeping them close and keeping them at home and not wanting them to be out late. And a lot of those kind of double standards in some ways about how women can be in public and how men can be in public. And so that's why I'm like, I want to hear about women listening to records together at home, because that's important too. It's not just what happens outside, that we learn a lot and we teach each other a lot, and we create music at home together in ways that we don't really talk about, and it's not treated as important. So I'm a big supporter of home DJs.
Jennifer, I would like to know what influenced you to this very keen interest in this kind of music.
Well, a couple things. One, growing up, I grew up with my dad's record collection. My dad, he passed away about 10 years ago, but he had 1,000. I have him in my house now up here, but 1,000 records. And from my whole childhood, I just grew up in a house full of music, and a house full of all kinds of music. My dad was really into Motown and soul and rock. And so I grew up listening really widely. And also I grew up in Southern California. And so I'm the same age as hip hop. Hip hop and I were born in 1974, according to historians. And so coming up with it, and when it reached the West Coast, like I heard Africa Bambaataa when I was, 6 or 7, roller skating outside, listening to the radio with my friends. And music became a way of socializing together and listening to all sorts of different kinds of music in a really multiracial, multi-ethnic community. I grew up in Riverside, about 60 miles east of Los Angeles. So music was just such an important part of how we all connected and communicated, even though it definitely was not, it's not a, you all know LA, it's not a utopic space out there, but it provided a way for us to really, relate to each other and think about the world. And that kind of began like this lifelong listening. And my dad treated listening as so seriously. Like my dad kept stats on how much he played his records and who was his favorite. And he would write it down every time he played a record. So he took his listening practice like it was research. And so that, he didn't play an instrument. I don't play an instrument. But listening became a way of participating in music, and I was involved in a lot of music scenes, and so it's been something that for me has uplifted me and connected me with people in that way. So learning about, but also as a woman, not being taken seriously as a music fan, as a music collector, as a music scholar, it's still a very male dominated field. And so kind of going like, well, why don't we think moms have good music taste? Like, where does that come from? That, like, that's ridiculous. And so pursuing that. The funny part was when I told my son about this research, he was like 10 at the time. And he looked at me and he goes, well, why would anyone think that about moms? Like, that's crazy. And I was like, yes, exactly. But he's grown up with me playing music for him at the house, So I don't want anyone to think that about moms anymore.
Was that a combination of going from Southern California to Oakland?
I came out here. I lived in Rochester, Southern California to Rochester, back to Southern California to living out here. And when I lived out here, I started connecting with, I actually gave a speech at the opening of the hip hop collection about like the importance of archiving. A graduate student at Cornell asked me to come talk. And then they hired a man named Ben Ortiz, who's their archivist, and he listened to my speech. Actually, I was pregnant with my son, so pregnant. And he heard the speech and he said, hey, we'd like you to be on the board. We like what you had to say. And then that relationship with Ben Ortiz and I has actually led to a lot of different kinds of writing. And he's great. If you ever do want to go visit the hip hop collection, I'd be happy to connect you with Ben. He's like their community liaison. He really does all sorts of things to bring. I brought classes up from Binghamton to have presentations there. And they really want the archive to be something that's shared in this area and not just kind of hidden up at Cornell. So I'm like the Binghamton connection and liaison there. And it's through Ben that I was introduced to Africa Bambaataa, to Joe Konzo, to his mom. And so I do a lot of collaboration with them there. And yeah, learning about
I was just checking my address book, but I couldn't find Dish in there. But I remember his name is Robert Dish. That's Disch. And memory tells me he lives on 12 Laurel Avenue in Binghamton.
I will definitely check that out. I'm always looking for people that have records and want to talk about records and need a good home for their records. I have about 2,000 now, my dad's and my own, that I've been putting together since I had got my first record at 5. So. Oh boy. Yeah, I never stopped.
And Jennifer, please tell him that Beverly Dorsey, Dorsey, recommended him to you, or you to him, or whichever way.
I will.
I think he'll remember that. Robert Dish.
Excellent, thank you. And I did put my email in there. If you do come across someone who you think would want to talk to me or want to be interviewed, or like, you never know what, sometimes, it takes a while to think about connections you might have, but I would love to hear from you.
Rick, did you want to say something?
Yes. Oh, Rick. Go ahead.
I have a Binghamton Central High School story from 1972. When Carole King's album came out, and everybody fell in love with You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, there are a group of us that played in Bernie Schifrin's stage band, jazz band, and said, wait a minute, we've heard that before. And there was a revival of Aretha Franklin when I was in high school. That was Binghamton Central High School. That was a very strong revival of Aretha Franklin. I fell in love with Aretha Franklin in the, then in the early 70s, admiring King, but also realizing that, wait a minute, Carole King's great and everything, but she's just capitalizing on this amazing music that came before her. And I think the spirit is continued here in Binghamton for one reason or another.
Good. Glenn, do you have anything? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adrian. You're next.
Okay. So two things. And thank you for that memory. I love that Carole King album. Okay, so two things. One is music is the universal language, and it really resonated with me that you opened up people's minds so they wanted to hear world music, not just one type of music. You know, that the listeners that you're that you're introducing to us, many of them were people that were interested in all kinds of music. And so we have a lot of IBM type people with us today. And so they're aware of the fact that the Google algorithms just give you more and more of what you want. So people are going into their silos, and it's pretty bad because I like animals, and you wouldn't believe how many cat videos show up recommended to me. It's kind of weird. Okay, so there's that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that so Janine and I are we have great aunts who are the Higher Sisters, and the Higher Sisters are the first Black opera singers in the United States. So they were born around 1860s. No, I'm sorry. They were already afoot. In the 1860s, they were they were born in Sacramento, California, and they traveled to the East Coast and sang in Barnum's Peace Jubilee in Boston. And anyway, one of them could hit high C like Jenny Lind. So I've been doing some research on them. So maybe we could find out if there's anything that you know about that. I don't get a chance to do my research. I've got too many things going on in life right now, but anyway.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I've done some research. The second chapter of my book looks at Jenny Lind and Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield from Buffalo and her tours in the 1850s following Jenny Lind in cities like Rochester. She didn't play here. The Jubilee Singers were supposed to play in Rochester, but there was a mix-up in their, what do you call those? Telegraph messages. And so they skipped Binghamton and went straight to New York City. So they didn't get to stop here.
No, they played in Binghamton because they stayed at our house.
Oh, well, later, I mean, the 1870s Jubilee Singers, like the first group, because they've been, they've been continuous since the 1870s in some way. But yeah. I have a colleague at Queen's University in Toronto, and Kristen Mariah, and she does work on Black Patty. She does work on all those women. She would love to talk to you both. And I would be, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to put you in connection with her, because that is what her book is about. She's a really great scholar, and I can send you some of her research that she's done already. Oh my goodness, she'll be so excited. Thank you for sharing that. That's a fantastic story. It'd be great to hear a presentation on that.
Great. Father Glenn, do you have anything you would like to ask or say? You always have.
And I think I see Karima's hand up too.
Who does?
Karima.
Oh, yeah. Karima. Okay, start with Karima, then we'll do Father Glenn after that. Go, Karima.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that this was fascinating. This was the first time that I actually got to hear a full presentation from Dr. Jenny. So thank you for sharing these ideas with us today. I had so many things going through my mind, but I think in the beginning when you started with the image of the stereo that sat central on the dresser, I think it was the picture in the photos that the son was showing of the way the mother's stereo was central in her room. It just made me think of my time as a child. My parents met because my father was a DJ in the 70s. And so we grew up at, I was 78. So, fell in love with hip hop at the time, but their music was all of Motown, all of the other stuff that he would, do parties around Brooklyn. And we were just over it. I was so over it. I used to like try to find, his records and hide them so that we didn't have to hear them. Because as a child, I was like, I don't want to listen to this. Like, this is where it's at. But now as an adult, I recognize all of the music. And, it's something that I share with my dad after my mom passed, is like the music, the songs, and how that was their love language. And, when I experienced my first breakup in college, and I didn't get it until someone said, you know what, you need to get that Mary J. Blige album and listen to My Life, that will help you with this. And I did it, and it actually did work. And I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I get how my mother, the same way that one of your subjects expressed their feelings. Like if she was listening to, this song, we knew it was a good day, but if it was over here, we would steer clear of her because that was not a good space for us. But I recognize that in my mother's experience with music and playing music and, sitting in the kitchen at the table. And as an adult, I got it, and I wish I understood it then and was able to share and maybe converse through some of those times, whether it was joyful times or painful times. But I love this, and it was so great to just have those ideas just flushing through my brain. And so I really appreciate it. I will continue to follow you in all of your sonic research, and I think this is fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you. I would love to talk to you more about it. As you were talking, I was thinking about, Kamal Yard?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I interviewed his mom for this project.
Aww.
And she has this, she is wonderful because she still lives in the same house that she grew up at. So as she was telling me stories about the family, like singing in front of the mirror, like the mirror was right behind me. It was incredible. And Kamal was
Awesome.
there, and he was laughing about like the songs his mom would play to wake him up to clean on Saturday
Yes.
morning. And she
Yes.
said the music will get louder and louder and louder till everybody got up. And
Yep.
she was also telling me that they would play when they would have parties there, that the aunts would do the DJing mostly. And then when it was time for the kids to go to bed, they would play Hit the Road Jack, and they just play it over and over until the kids all got the message to go upstairs.
Love it.
And then she also told me about her, her ex-husband. She said he called her out of the blue one day because he was driving, and Phyllis Hyman came on the radio, and it was like 25 years later, and he calls her up and goes, I finally get why you were playing those records all that time. Like I finally listened to Phyllis Hyman, and I'm sorry. And she was
That's a great one.
It's a little late, but I'm glad you finally got it.
I'm glad this is a learning experience for you.
Yeah, exactly. I was sending you the message, but it was not being received. But I'm glad that you picked up on it now. So yeah, sometimes it takes a while for that communication to get home.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So much. Thank you.
I'd love to talk to your dad too. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Music guy.
I wanted to say that
there's a new bag.
Oh.
So Sue Carpenter, do you want something? And then we'll kind of close out with Glenn so everybody can go to lunch. But Sue Carpenter, you first.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to ask a question or make a comment? Sue Carpenter?
Oh, yeah. As I'm listening to this, I'm just fascinated by the fact that so many of the stories that you're telling, I think of, my dad we used to wake up the same kind of thing, and whatever music was playing. And I discovered as a young housewife, if I put on musicals, I was in the mood to clean and dance while I was cleaning. And another time, now I've been introduced to a whole nother line of music with our choir. This is so universal. I just don't see it as hip hop as one thing. And I would love to, I also think of the day I was so lucky we got to go hear Slam Stewart here in Binghamton.
Wow.
And he was jazz, right? But where do we go from hip hop to jazz? I would just love to have, what you're saying to me is so important for a segment, but the segments are phenomenally large. There are so many in You know, I can't call this racist. I got to tell you, it's life, it's people, it's everything. It's what makes us tick. I think it's marvelous.
I learned about jazz from hip hop because I didn't grow up. My dad was very much like rock and soul household, but artists like the Diggable Planets and A Tribe Called Quest and a lot of the hip hop artists from the 90s, they grew up with their mom's record collections and dad's record collections listening to jazz. And so a lot of their samples, that's how I learned about Ron Carter. That's how it was all from hip hop samples and the tracing those back.
Well, and to think that Cornell has this marvelous library or archives of it. I mean, I just think it's phenomenal to get these, you know, to get the history like you've done on one segment. And, you know, didn't Ken Burns do a whole segment on jazz? And, you know, thank heavens we had these periods of time that this grew and now people are studying it. I think it's wonderful.
I put the link in there to the hip hop collection so you can see, like in the chat, so you can see what they have. And I'll also put the link that goes right to Joe Conzo's photographs, because they're not just of hip hop. I love that they're just photographs of family life in the Bronx in the 70s and 80s. And also it's important to you know, to change the way we think about the Bronx in that period, and a lot of the legacy of it as you know, just a place, again, of disinvestment, of violence, of like all that kind of idea about the Bronx burning. And certainly that was, you know, a devastating part of people's lives, but it was not the whole story. And you know, learning about and celebrating people's family life and connection and the culture people created to get by and to thrive in that terrible space is important. Definitely check out those photographs and look at what the hip hop archive has. It's a good, really great resource to have so close.
Wonderful.
Speaking of close, Al Hom is a very, very good friend of Slam Stewart's, and Al is not a spring chicken either. He could certainly qualify for a library card. But he's been an emeritus professor of music at Binghamton University. He could really help you into the Slam Stewart trail of things, because they were buddies for decades, probably since the first day he arrived in Binghamton. So would be my guess. So anyway.
Okay, I have to leave now, goodly people, but yes, I know the theme and the whole discussion is music is universal, and at different times we have different types of music, but it's still universal. So with that, I have to say thank you for a very, very interesting and educational and historic and et cetera, presentation. And let's do some more of it again sometime in the future. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye all.
And Father Glenn, do you want to say a goodbye? Bye, Beverly. Bon appetit.
Sure. We'll just say goodbye to everybody, and I hope you have a good lunch. There's another aspect of this that you know, begs to be researched and looked at too. When I first heard that you were speaking about the altar of Aretha Franklin, I loved it, because the one song that always sticks out to me with Aretha is Respect. And when I was growing up in the early post Jim Crow South, we listened to a lot of Motown, and we listened to a lot of white music too. So I mean, all of these things just got intermixed with each other. I mean, it was intermixed to the point where it wasn't racial. And we're surrounded by this society that is incredibly segregationalist and racially fractured. But the kids, we were all listening to music that was beyond the racial differences. And it was just so cool. I mean, it was just like, this is the way it's supposed to be. It was kind of a vision for the future. And so if you look at some of these things, I start thinking about all the white musicians that were so affected by so many of the Black musicians. I think about Eric Clapton. I think about the Beatles. You know, you can go on and on and on and on and on. And not just blues, but a lot of the other forms of music like you're talking about. I mean, it resonates with the human being. It's the human piece of it. And you want to have connections between, you know, different types of people, different ages of people, and everything else. It's the music that's going to get you there, as Trinity well knows. I mean, that's exactly one of the connections Trinity has. So thank you so much for your presentation. Absolutely wonderful. Great stuff.
Unmute and clap. Yay!
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It was wonderful to meet all of you, and have a wonderful day today.
Yep. Come back and see us again.